Hey everybody, it is Friday night and we are getting ready for an NBA Finals Game 4 with Boston and Golden State, but we've got 45 minutes, so we are going to try to get this UFC Roundup in before the finals start. Always appreciate likes, retweets, definitely hit that subscribe or the like on the video if you're watching. I'll be checking out the comments. I'm going to try to do a better job of kind of looking at those in between the fights and stuff. So leave me some comments. Tell me what you like as we're going here. It's an okay UFC card. Not the best pay-per-view ever, but hey, any UFC card is one where we can make money, right? So we'll live with that. Let's see. I think that's it. Let's just get into it. All right, first fight up of the night, we got Ramona Pasquale and Jocelyn Edwards. As always, guys, I'm going to start out by trying to give you a quick summary of what the analysts and cappers out there are saying. I do listen to a lot of hours of UFC content from people who know what they're talking about every week, and so I try to give you the roundup on what everybody's saying. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to try to do it in quick fashion. On this one, people talk about how Pasquale is pretty new to MMA. Started about 6 years ago or something like that from Hong Kong. On the other side, and most people will say that she is not very good and pretty slow, not super impressive. On the other side, Jocelyn Edwards from Panama, very athletic, pretty light on her feet, a pretty decent striker at range, but also people will talk about the fact that she can get taken down by a strong gust of wind. And so in general, this is just a very low-level fight, and low-level UFC fights, especially in the women's division, tend to be very high variance. So that's what people talked about. Honestly, there weren't a lot of people who spent a ton of time on the first few fights, so there's just not going to be as much on those. In terms of the consensus picks here, overall, most people are taking Jocelyn Edwards, and most people are taking the fight goes the distance. This is a fight I actually dug into some, so I have a little bit more in terms of my own thoughts on this one than I do on some of the other fights. Went back and watched tape. Looked at some of the stats. So let's talk about Ramona Pasquale first. She's 6-3 as a pro, so not a ton of pro fights, but she is big and thick, and I believe that this is at 145. It might be at 135. Either way, she's going to be a big fighter, and I think that could play in here. There's really going to be a difference between she and Edwards, not so much in terms of height and stuff, but in terms of actual size. And that plays into the fact that Pasquale tends to be slower and a little bit more plodding, where Edwards is thin and athletic, and so she's moving a lot more quickly in and out, all that kind of stuff. Now, in Pasquale's first fight in the UFC, she fought Josiane Nunes, which if you watch that fight or know anything about Josiane Nunes, she is short and compact, a little bit like Jessica Andrade, and she absolutely has some power in her hands. I think before this fight, Nunes had put out everyone in the UFC in the first round or something. No, don't quote me. That might be wrong. But she had definitely put people down with that power. She did end up getting Pasquale out of there as well. But if you watch the fight, Pasquale came forward some. She did not just accept being beaten up. She got hit hard and stayed in there. I was really impressed with her toughness in that fight, even though she certainly was outclassed in that one. She did take it on short notice, and so didn't have a full camp to get ready or anything like that. And so I think that this fight could be a little bit different because she's at that time. Also, she is from Hong Kong, so from this part of the world where the fights will be taking place. That was a very different fight because Nunes is just a different fighter than Edwards is. The other thing here is that Pasquale's takedown attempts did not look good against Nunes, but she did get her down, which is something that's worth noting. On the other side, for Jocelyn Edwards, she's 10-4 as a pro, lost decisions to Rose Clark and to Carol Hossa before that. So, can't fault that too much. Obviously, Carol Hossa, great fighter, and then Jessica Rose Clark is decent. Beat Yanan Wu in January of 2021. I don't know that you can take too much away from that. It's not anything to write home about. So really, as you look back at her last 3 fights in the UFC, she's lost to 2 decent fighters and beat a really bad one. I don't know how much we take away from that. She does have a 70-inch reach, and so this again comes down to that length and athleticism and her ability to strike fairly well, especially from the outside. She was taken down easily by Jessica Rose Clark and controlled once it got there, which I think could play a role in this fight. So looking at the way that these two fighters match up, definitely Ramona, it'll be interesting to see if Pasquale is able to kind of track her down and catch up to her. I think that if Edwards wins, she's going to stay on the outside, keep moving, get away from Pasquale throughout the whole fight, and point fight her. Because of Pasquale's toughness, I don't really see Edwards having the power to put her away. Anything can happen, but I don't think it's a likely outcome. I think the path for Pasquale is to be able to take Edwards down and then be heavy on top. While I wasn't super impressed by her takedown versus Nunes, she did get it. And if she does get it against Edwards, she is that thicker, bigger fighter. And I think she would be able to potentially establish some top control if she did it. And so I do think that she has a path to victory here. Let's see. Yeah, so that's kind of how I'm looking at this one. So in terms of bets on this, I would actually lean toward a shot on Pasquale. Let me refresh this to make sure the lines are recent here. Plus 145 right now is the line. And I see a path to victory for both fighters here. Again, low-level fight. And so in that case, I would lean toward taking a shot on the dog. I also do like the overs for this fight, and potentially fight goes the distance as well. I'm sure that is, yeah, over 2.5 is minus 227. This is the kind of stuff where I'm just more talking about using it in parlays potentially. So that is the first fight. Next up, we have another low-level women's fight against Liangna and Sylvana Gomez Juarez. In terms of what people are saying about this fight, they talk about how Na is first round or bust, how she shoots takedowns from halfway across the octagon, is all pace, and tends to gas herself out if she doesn't get a finish in the first round. Juarez, on the other side, has some power in her hands, has definitely struggled in the UFC to this point, but people believe that she does have the power to be able to put Liangna out if she is able to connect cleanly. Most people see this as really a typical striker versus grappler matchup, even if it's low level. You know, we see these fights in the UFC with some regularity where, you know, okay, one fighter, if she can get it to the ground and get a good position, there's probably a high probability that she's able to get some kind of submission. If it stays on the feet, and especially at distance, Gomez Juarez has the better striking over time and probably either is able to knock Na out or get her way to a decision victory. So the consensus picks on this one, people are leaning toward Liangna overall, but there wasn't an overall consensus. There were some people who were on Juarez as well. People also are leaning toward fight doesn't go the distance. That was probably the most consensus pick on this fight, more than picking an actual fighter. My take on this fight, I definitely agree this is a low-level fight, which again makes it very volatile, just like the first one. This is one where, again, I did go back and watch tape myself and dive into this one some more. And I will say, especially in that first round, while it is kind of all or nothing, Liangna is impressive with her grappling. Very athletic, able to switch positions quickly. And granted, the fights I watched weren't against really high-level people, but I don't think Sylvana Gomez Juarez is high-level either, especially on the ground. And so, and also at 25 years old, I don't think we can count it out that Liangna is going to continue to improve fight to fight. And so this may be a better version of her than what we've seen before. Based just on the stats, which I'm not basing this just on the stats, but I do want to bring it in on this fight. You would think from those that Na would submit her. She has 6.96 takedowns per 15 minutes, and Gomez Juarez has a 14% takedown defense. So she gets taken down, on a regular basis. And granted, some of that has been against good fighters. She did fight Lupi Godinez, who has looked dominant since. That's a loss that's aged well, but also lost to Demopoulos. And in both of those fights, she lost by armbar. And in the last two fights, I believe it is, for Na, she finished both of those by armbar. So this is a move that Liangna gets on a regular basis, and Gomez Juarez has given it up in her last two UFC fights. So I really do believe that the most likely outcome here is for Liangna to be able to push a pace, get Gomez Juarez down to the ground, put her in trouble, and ultimately submit her. Now, again, I say that that's the most likely outcome. If she doesn't submit her, if she can't get her to the ground, this fight could look ugly by the second round because Na will probably gas out and not have much left. Maybe Gomez Juarez is able to get a knockout if the fight gets to that point, or maybe they both just kind of throw some strikes here and there and we get to an ugly, greasy, potentially split decision. So that's what I think on this fight. In terms of bets for me, I do like the fight doesn't go the distance, which would have to be for parlays because of how juiced up it is. Even under 1.5 isn't plus money anymore, so everybody's expecting this fight to end quickly, which I do, but at the same time, under 1.5 is tough to jump on. I did already put some money on Liangna. I got her at plus 130-ish, and I think that she's plus 110 now. Honestly, I don't hate it for like a half unit shot. Still, I do favor her in this matchup, even though, again, it's not a given. And I may sprinkle some on Liangna by first round submission too, as I believe that is her most likely path to victory, though certainly not her only one. Next up, we have Young Ho Kang versus Dana Bakari, which I think it's Bakari. I heard a lot of people fucking up name pronunciations this week. But I can't talk because when I did the show with Shady earlier this week, I said Bakkarel, which apparently is not how you say that name. So it is Dana Bakari. And it might even be Bakari Dana. Anyway, some of these names are tough, but some of them are not as tough, and they still don't get pronounced right. But whatever. I can't talk because I can't do it either. In terms of what people are saying on this fight, Young Ho Kang, 3-inch reach advantage, can get some takedowns and control, is more of a all-around, well-rounded fighter, where Dana Bakari is more of a dynamic striker. He swings big. He wants to put people out, and that can actually cause him some problems at times because the big swinging striking game can leave openings for counters for him to get put down as well. 4 of his 5 fights in the UFC have finished inside the distance, so this is a guy who does not usually go to decision. In terms of the consensus on this fight, most people are on Bakari, though most people also think that it'll be a pretty good fight. So it's not like most people think it'll be a blowout, but at close to even odds, that is where most people are. In terms of my take on this one, I probably have less here than almost any other fight on the card. This is one that I don't pretend to have a great feel for. I do think earlier in the week, I believe Shady was on Dana Bakari, so maybe that's a good look. I probably won't have much on this one. I haven't even decided what I'm going to use for parlays yet. So that doesn't give you a ton of good information, but it at least tells you where many of the people on the podcast and stuff who I listen to, where they end up at this one, which is mostly on Dana. Next one up, I think a little bit more interesting, Andre Fialho and Jake Matthews. Andre Fialho, this is his 3rd fight in 3 months. If you watch the UFC, you definitely know about Andre Fialho right now, who came over to the UFC and lost a decision, I believe, to Michel Pereira, which is no shame in that one, man. That's actually a pretty good loss, if there is one. And then has had 2 first-round knockouts since then against Van Camp and Baeza. Not super high-level fighters, but he's got power in his hands. I mean, you can't question a guy who's put out 2 guys in a row in the first round. This is something he can definitely do. And so people are relatively high on Andre Fialho, at least high on him in the first round and on his power striking. On the other side, you have Jake Matthews, who came into the UFC as a pretty highly touted prospect and hasn't really lived up to it. What people talk about with Jake Matthews, for the most part, is how when you look at his record, he's beaten people that he kind of should beat who aren't very good. And then anytime there's been a significant step up in competition, he's lost those fights, and he hasn't been able to really beat anyone of significance in the UFC, and that's pretty much been his career. People do say that he's more well-rounded than Fialho. He can get the fight to the mat. In fact, a lot of people talked about him needing to get the fight to the mat and not staying on the feet too long, though he does have a little bit of a striking game, just not as much as Fialho. A lot of people said they believe if he can avoid getting KO'd, he has a pretty good chance to win, and he has not been knocked out in his pro career. So if Fialho is able to do it, he'll be the first one to do it. Consensus on this fight is actually Jake Matthews. It's not unanimous, but I would say 80% plus of the people I listened to ended up on Jake Matthews. And I think a part of that is because he is an underdog. Trying to find him here. Plus 125 now. I think it was plus 135 or plus 140 earlier in the week. So that line has come in some. but that is where most people are ending up, is on Matthews. For me on this fight, I do think this is a really interesting fight. Fialho fighting for the third time in 3 months does seem like it could be an issue to me, especially going through 3 weight cuts. I think Clint from Die Hard MMA talked about this in terms of the weight cuts. And then someone else I was listening to today, maybe Daniel Levy, brought this up as well. And I just thought it was a solid point. So I don't think if someone doesn't take too much damage, it's probably not a huge deal to turn around and fight a month later. But it is not necessarily easy to be cutting weight and then rehydrating and coming back up and then fighting and then turning around, a month or less later and doing the same thing all over again. Plus, you have the travel to different places, which I know most fighters will be dealing with the travel issues. But Fialho's going all around to these different places to fight. And so I just think that it could potentially have an impact on him. So I wonder if we will see something less than the best version of Fialho in this fight. I also do, obviously Fialho can put people out, but he can get put away too. He's been durable lately, but earlier in his career, he was not as durable as he has been in recent times. So it's not a sure thing. And if you go back and even watch his last couple fights, he gets rocked a little bit too in those fights and gets a little wobbly. It's just that he's able to push through and put the other guy down. And so I don't think he's indestructible or something with his chin. I don't think a knockout is Matthews' best path to victory here, but it's not impossible is what I'm saying. The last time Fialho was completely finished, was 3 years ago by Chris Curtis. No shame in that. Chris Curtis is a great fighter. And so, it has been a little while since he's been put all the way out. I don't see a lot of reason to be super high on Jake Matthews. I think by this time in his career, if he was going to show very much, he probably would have done so already. However, when I look at the people that he's beat and the people he's lost to, it is this difference in competition. And in my assessment of Fialho for now, and even listening to other people, I would say Fialho's somewhere in between. That's what makes this fight interesting to me, is that if Fialho was better, I would say that Matthews is going to get beat again. If Fialho was a little worse, I'd say, yeah, Matthews probably has the skills to be able to beat this guy. But Fialho feels like he's kind of right in the middle to me. And so where I end up going with this fight, and I do have a bet on this, though it's not big, and I'm still kind of thinking about it. But there are 2 factors that seem big to me here. Number one is if Jake Matthews can get the fight to the ground, I think that he can either submit or control Fialho or at least gas him out. And so I think that that's going to be a big deal of whether he's able to get the fight to the ground or not. And then the second thing is just the quick turnaround, not just once, but twice now for Fialho. I think that could potentially be problematic for him, and we at least get a little bit worse version. So the bet that I made here is on Jake Matthews. I am going to continue to think about this one, but that's what I've done so far with this fight. All right, we move on to Mahasate versus Steve Garcia. Took me a few times to hear people say Mahasate to try to get that right. In terms of what people say on this fight, I mean, really, there's not a lot of in-depth analysis, I wouldn't say, that I heard on these 2 fighters. It's mostly that Mahasate was an underdog on a Contender Series fight where he wasn't even that impressive, but he was able to kind of endure a beating and then ultimately come on and get a victory. He's a Chinese prospect who only has a handful of fights. And I think it was Daniel Levy who specifically said that most of the time he doesn't mind the guys that Dana White signs off the Contender Series. There's some kind of reason to bring them on board, even if they're not amazing. But the Mahasate was one where he's like, man, this dude should not be in the UFC. I did not get to go back and watch tape, but the way that people talk about him, that seems legit to me. So most people not real high on Mahasate, even though there were a couple people who said maybe this guy has upside in the long run. But a lot of people talk too about how Chinese prospects coming into the UFC have really struggled. And this is another place where that could be the case. Steve Garcia, on the other hand, another guy who has not been impressive. People say this is a middling to middle lower UFC fighter even. There's nothing that he does insanely well, but he does have some decent UFC experience. His big claim to fame is before coming to the UFC, he beat Ronnie Lawrence, who has been a really strong prospect. And so people will say Steve Garcia does at least have some real experience. Probably doesn't hang around in the UFC in the long run, but it is okay. I mean, basically, If I could sum up what people say about this fight, it's Mahasate is not good and Steve Garcia is okay. That's probably the way to put it. So the consensus on this one is Steve Garcia. The consensus is also that this is not necessarily a great fight, but it's probably on here because Mahasate is sort of close to home. So my take on this one, not a ton to add. It would just be that while Steve Garcia has nothing to write home about, I don't feel any confidence in what I see, what I've heard, what I read about Mahasate. I think he probably should not be in this spot, but as a Chinese prospect, they want to put him on this card because of the location. And so the only thing that gives me pause here is if this goes to a decision. Does it matter where the fights are or not? I don't know. But I think this is as good a spot as there can be for Steve Garcia. So my bets are, and when I say my bets, by the way, I'm telling you if I've already put money on it. What I mean by my bets is just what I'm leaning toward. I may not bet every single one of these. I will put those on bet stamp if I make the bets. But it's Garcia and Garcia inside the distance for me here. Next up, we have Sungwoo Choi and Josh Kulabao. So this one, Josh Kulabao is more of an unknown from Australia, a guy that most people will say is not all that athletic, pretty plodding, not an incredibly dynamic striking game, does have some power, but that he's very tough and can fight through a lot of adversity. And that is something that, there is, I guess, some value to, though you don't want to see people get like absolutely destroyed or anything, but he's not going to be getting taken out easily. He did lose to Jalen Turner in the UFC, but you really can't fault him for that. Jalen Turner is a very solid prospect, and I think he could have a really high upside as he moves forward in the UFC. So that loss is not too bad of a loss. Sungwoo Choi on the other side from South Korea is a very good all-around fighter, strong in the striking, strong on the ground. This is a guy who many people say if he hadn't had his compulsory military service for South Korea, that he could have had a really strong and more of a career by now. He's 9-1, but missed a decent amount of time because of that military service. This is one where I think there are a lot of people who have respect for Josh Kulabao. As I think Dan Levy said, he said, Josh Kulabao is my spirit animal, but he also didn't pick him to win here. This is a spot that should be really strong for Sungwoo Choi, actually. And so the consensus is Choi and then some Choi inside the distance. Though, again, people do talk about Kulabao being durable. My take here is that Choi lost to Gavin Tucker and Mozar Evloev, but those are both really solid fighters. I don't think there's any shame in losing to either of those guys. And he did beat Yusuf Zalal and Julian Erosa, which are decent wins. I know Erosa's maybe not amazing, but Yusuf Zalal is solid. Those are good wins. At this point, I think that Sungwoo Choi is just a different level of fighter than Josh Kulabao is. Now, like others have said, we don't have a lot on Josh Kulabao. He's a little bit of an unknown, so maybe we see something different this weekend. But from what we know so far, I just don't think these two guys are on the same level. I don't really see anywhere that Kulabao has the advantage, and I don't expect Choi to gas out or anything, which would maybe be the only thing that Kulabao could hope for, to fight through the first couple rounds, get him gassed out, and then be able to do something. I don't think it happens. This is one of the stronger places on the card for me so far that I like, is I really do like Sungwoo Choi here. He is minus 225, so that will probably be a parlay piece for me. It will probably not be a straight bet. And I may do some on Sungwoo Choi inside the distance too, though I think I do want to focus on him straight up on the money line in some parlays more than I want to focus on a method for this one. So yeah, probably strongest spot of the card so far for me. Next up, we have Brendan Allen versus Jacob Malcoon. In terms of what people say here, it's really pretty basic. Jacob Malcoon, they talk about how he is Robert Whittaker's coach, training partner. This is how he got into the UFC. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I get to my take on this fight. Robert Whittaker was supposed to be fighting on this card, and they basically throw Jacob Malcoon on every card that Whittaker is on. And so he kind of rides Whittaker's coattails. However, people will say that they have been more impressed with Malcoon than they thought they would be. They thought he would just sort of get destroyed once or twice and then be out of the UFC, but that has not been the case. He's outperformed expectations so far. He has wins over Al Hassan and Dobson, but he did lose to Phil Hawes. But, decent overall so far in the UFC. On the Brendan Allen side, people like his overall skill set. They like how he's developed his striking over the years. They think that he's a strong grappler, that if he can get the back, which he does with some regularity, he is definitely able to put the moves together to be able to choke people out and end fights. People, skill set wise, I would say, are very high on Brendan Allen from what I hear, actually. The knock people have against him is his fight IQ, that he goes in with game plans or makes decisions in fights that cause him to lose when he should win. And so while people do trust his skill set, they don't trust his fight IQ as much. The consensus on this fight is Brendan Allen for sure. I don't think I heard a single person take Jacob Malcoon, though some people gave him some respect. They ended up taking Brendan Allen. And people also like fight goes the distance here as well. They think that this, though people do think Allen could finish the fight, if they were going to pick, that's where they lean. In terms of my take on this fight, again, maybe not my strongest read. I didn't get to watch as much tape on this one, but I have watched fights from both of these fighters and definitely listened to what people were saying this week. But I would say that my opinion has been skewed some by the fact that everyone talks about how Malcoon just got into the UFC because of Robert Whittaker. And so when he came in, I expected him to royally suck. And he hasn't royally sucked. And every time he goes out to fight, I expect him to just get destroyed, and he doesn't get destroyed. It seems patently untrue at this point that he is not capable of being in the UFC. Is he like a former or a future title challenger or something? No, hell no, he's not. But he seems like a decent, at least middling UFC fighter. And so I'm having to try to adjust my perception of Malcoon because of what I thought he would be coming in. The other thing for me here is I really don't like putting money on a big favorite who has questionable fight IQ. I mean, it's great if Brendan Allen has a better skill set all around, but if he's going to be an idiot and fuck around, then he can still get beat because Jacob Malcoon has shown that he has what it takes to win UFC fights. I also do like how Malcoon has showed heart in his fights. Now, where there's a massive skill gap, it's not like you can win just on heart, but I do think it matters some. And he's shown that. So in terms of what I like for this fight, I do like the overs. I think, and that'll be for parlays more, but I like this fight to go over 1.5, over 2.5, maybe even fight to go the distance. Sure, Brendan Allen could put him away, but I don't know if it happens. I'm also considering putting a little bit on Jacob Malcoon here. I think that for all the reasons that I mentioned, right now he's plus 255. That seems like a good dog shot to me on a guy who, yes, probably is more likely to lose than win, but I think has paths to victory there. So I haven't bet that or anything yet, but I am considering it, is what I would say. All right, we move on to the main card here, which will only have 4 fights since Bontarine and Kopp is off the card, which means we should be able to get this wrapped up before the NBA starts, which is the whole goal here. All right, so next up we have, leading off the main card, and maybe they'll put a new fight in here. But for now, Jack Della Maddalena versus Ramazan Emeev. This is another one that's pretty straightforward in terms of what people say. Again, it's the striker versus grappler matchup. The difference here is that Ramazan Emeev is not good at getting people down and holding them down. He's primarily good at putting people up against the cage and kind of holding them there, clinch fighting, potentially going for and getting some takedowns, but often his opponents are able to scramble back to the feet without too much trouble. But he's a grappler, and he wins boring. When he wins boring. He wins by controlling people, clinching them, getting control time, landing a few shots, getting a few takedowns, and that's how he wins. On the other side, you have Jack Della Maddalena, who is a striker. So I've heard some people compare him to Sean Strickland, not saying that he is as good as Sean Strickland, but saying he's that kind of fighter. He's the kind of guy who is going to pump out a lot of volume, is a very good striker at range, doesn't necessarily put a bunch of power on his punches, but has the capability to sit down on a punch when he sees an opening and actually put some power behind it. And so he's going to have a lot higher volume, especially, I mean, if there's any space for him to have the volume. Yeah. And a pretty accurate, good striker. So should be able to outclass Emeev on the feet where there's space. So pretty straightforward striker versus grappler in this one. The biggest difference just being that in some striker versus grappler fights, if the fight goes to the ground, it's over or close. Where in this one, most people believe that Della Maddalena will be able to get up if the fight goes to the ground, and so it's not necessarily just over. The consensus here is definitely Jack Della Maddalena. I think pretty much every single person was on him. He started out as a dog this week and has just been climbing and climbing. He's up to minus 155 now, and that is reflective of what I heard coming from people this week. Also, there are quite a few people who like the overs or fight goes the distance, but right now over 2.5 is minus 213. So again, if you're going to use that, it's probably a parlay piece. In terms of my take on this fight, this is one I am definitely very interested in. I think it comes down to whether Jack can stay off the cage or not. I understand that if he gets all the way taken down, there's a good chance that he'll be able to get up. But if they get on the fence, is Ameev going to be able to control him? Or is Maddalena going to be strong enough, athletic enough, skilled enough to be able to push him off and get back to space where he can continue to land strikes? I don't know that we have enough info at this point to know that. Della Maddalena is just coming up. Ameev's been around for a little while, and so I don't think there's a solid answer to what happens when this fight is on the cage. Well, I can see Maddalena winning a decision here, absolutely, because if it stays at range, he's going to be able to piece Ameev up, and the judges definitely like striking, and so I think if it stays at range, if it goes to decision, he would win. But I also think if he wins, there's a decent chance that he's able to put him out at some point, because if he's getting enough space to be able to get a lot of strikes off, I think that's going to wear on Ameev over time, and I would be interested in like a round 3 KO prop here if I'm on the Maddalena side. If Ameev wins, I think a decision is extremely likely. I mean, could he sub him or something? Yeah, I suppose. But I think if you're going to take Ameev, I'd be hard-pressed not to get him by decision here, though because he's an underdog, maybe you don't want to fuck with it and just take the plus 135 on Ameev. So the other thing that and actually a lot of people talked about this, but I just agree with it. Judges have been rewarding striking and volume much more than control time. A lot of people reference the Holly Holm fight, which I think is a good one. Another, I lost the money on that one, but Holm had a lot more control time, but they didn't care because she didn't do damage and she just wasn't active enough. I think this is another one where let's say Ameev is getting control time on the cage 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes, but the 1.5 or 2 minutes that he doesn't have it, Maddalena's piecing them up and putting together a lot of volume, getting 1 or 2 big shots in. In the end, I think the judges are more likely to give those kind of rounds to Jack. So I really do think that Jack Della Maddalena is the side here. I absolutely wish that I had been on him earlier, but I think he's the right side. I haven't placed any bets, but I like the overs here for sure. Those will probably show up in parlays that you'll see them. I like Maddalena, and I like a little bit on Maddalena KO round 3 as well. I think that is a decent percentage pathway to victory for him. And I don't know what the number is, so I'll have to look. I would like that to be at least over plus 1,000 if I'm going to play a round 3 prop, especially round 3 KO. But this is another spot I would say I like pretty well, the overs and then Maddalena. Shady, good to see you. Good to see you in the comments, my man. I gotta see here what you got. You got Choi split decision majority. Oh, plus 1,000. I like that. Split decision at plus 1,000 is a good one. Yeah, there were a couple fights on this card where I thought split decision is not a bad look as well. I think you're saying maybe maybe Ameev. But yeah, a few fights here that actually this next one is actually one where, skipping ahead to the end, I think split decision is potentially a good look. So we're up to the rematch between Weili Zhang and Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Everybody says this is a rematch. Everyone knows this at this point. 2 years ago, Weili Zhang has been very active, fought Rose Namajunas twice, lost both times, one of them close, one of them not. Joanna has had a 2-year layoff. She has not fought anyone since she fought Zhang the first time in what was a very close but very violent fight. And so she's had a lot of time off. There are some people who have tried to speculate whether that time off will be good for her or not. Some people say it'll help her rest up. Others say, does this show that she's not really super invested anymore? Yeah, blah, 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 blah. no one knows. That's why I say that. Like, you can guess all day about why she took a 2-year layoff, but unless she tells you, then we don't know. So I don't think you can go with too much there. People talk about how Zhang has trained with Cejudo some. Wonder if her wrestling there'll be anything to show for that with the wrestling there. Also, people talk about Joanna wanting to keep this fight at range because she is a very good striker, where Zhang will probably want to crowd her and get in close to take away the space so that Joanna is less effective with her strikes. Consensus on this one is Joanna, but there definitely are detractors. I would say this was like 60 or 65% Joanna and 35% or so Weili Zhang. In terms of my take on this one, from everything I've listened to, from the fights I've gone back and watched, everything I've seen, read, heard, it's hard to imagine this fight not being somewhat close. It just feels like these fighters are very well matched, and about the only way that I could see it not being is if somehow Zhang's wrestling has massively improved, which it hasn't been that long. It's hard to imagine. But then she was able to take Joanna down and get some time on top in that position. That's the only way I see it not being close. So I think it is close. I think if Zhang does get takedowns, Joanna probably gets up. I do think Zhang has looked good overall. I'm definitely not down on her for those losses to Rose. I don't think that's anything to detract from her. I really don't care about Joanna's layoff too much. I'm not going to try to read into anything about that. It's just speculation. And so I do think this fight ends up being mostly striking again. Now, here's the thing. If the fight is close, who do you want to be on? Well, the traditional way to look at that would be to say you want to be on the underdog, which in this fight, Joanna is plus 145. If it's a close decision, you want to be on the plus 145 fighter. Makes sense. But on the other side, with this fight being in Thailand, which is, Zhang's part of the world, does that matter at all for the judges, but also for the crowd? If they are much more hyped up whenever she does something well and not so much when Joanna does that swing the judges at all? I mean, this isn't the first thing I go to, but I do think in that case, I would, give that a little bit of credibility. So that said, but being the favorite, where do you go? So this is for me where I do like the split decision prop here. I do need to go and look what the line on that is, but I think that this is a spot where a split decision absolutely could happen. I like the fight to go the distance. I like the overs, which a lot of people do. And then I maybe lean towards Zhang, actually. I think if she's able to crowd Joanna enough, she can take away some of Joanna's offense. But, man, I just don't know. I don't know that I'll end up betting a side on this one. I probably will end up with some split decision and then some over. Yeah, which, again, is going to be in a parlay because the over 2.5 is minus 300. So that's not going to work. So we got 2 fights left, and I've got 7 minutes till the NBA starts, which I'm going to try to get out of here in time for. Got the 2 title fights. First up is Shevchenko and Santos. In terms of what people talk about on this one, everyone loves to bring up that Santos lost to Mara Borella in her first fight in the UFC, and that's terrible. One person said anyone who loses to Mara Borella cannot be bet on in a title fight. Obviously kind of joking around, but, not a good look for the first UFC fight, but that happens to people. People talk about Santos being good since then, but also that she hasn't fought anyone great. Molly McCann, Jillian Robertson, Roxanne Modafferi, Joanne Wood. Okay fighters, basically, right? But not anywhere on the level of Valentina. Valentina is a GOAT. Valentina is the undisputed best at this weight class. She and Nunes, probably best women's fighters of all time. People talk about her having the advantage everywhere this fight goes against Santos. Luca Fury did make an interesting point in saying that if Valentina is going to lose to someone, it's probably not someone who's going to outpoint her. It's probably going to have to be someone who finishes her because of Valentina's skills in all different facets of the game. And that's Taila Santos does have some of that finishing ability. So while he did end up picking Valentina, no shocker. I mean, everyone did, right? While he did pick Valentina, there was an interesting point of like the kind of fighter that would have a chance to upset her is probably someone like Taila Santos. And so this may be the potentially toughest test that Valentina has faced. which isn't necessarily saying a lot, since the biggest thing people can point to is her losing 1 round to Jennifer Maia. So consensus here, obviously Valentina Shevchenko. Also, most people think this fight does go all 5 rounds. My take here, I do like Teixeira Santos's skill set. I think she has a really high upside. I think she's a really solid fighter at this weight class, and I think as she continues to develop, she actually can be a problem. I just don't think she's there at this point. I think her striking and her grappling could be more of a test than Valentina's had from other people, but I just think, you know, we're probably still years away and some development away from that being a real threat to Valentina outside of the banana peel kind of thing that can happen. I just think Valentina is still better than her everywhere, and unless it's just looking past her or something crazy out of the ordinary happens, Valentina, I think, wins this fight. And I do tend to agree that it probably goes all 5 rounds unless Tyler really pushes the action as like, I'm going to put her out or I'm going to get put out. You know, I think that's the only way. So I think the most likely outcome's Valentina by quite a bit, probably by decision, though I'm less confident on that. So my bet's Shevchenko, though, I mean, even to put that in parlays at -600 is pretty shitty. So I'd probably be more likely to look at an over as I see what those are. I think she does win by decision, and, you know, I like the fight to go longer. So that is the next to last fight, Shady on Shevchenko, decision as well. So, hey, maybe that'll give me a little more confidence to actually jump on that decision prop. Probably something that I'll have in the long shot parlay for sure. So, and then the last fight of the night, man, honestly, this card, like I said, this card overall, I don't think is really that good, but I think this fight kicks ass. I like this one. We'll see if I can stay awake long enough to see it here on the East Coast, or on Eastern time zone. This one, again, most people will talk about in a pretty straightforward way that it is striker versus grappler. Yuri Prochazka is a striker and a good striker and an active striker. Goes after people, can put people out, likes to fight with his hands down, which is something to maybe pay attention to, has fairly unorthodox movement, and so people have a harder time picking up what he's doing because it just doesn't look the same as a lot of other strikers. Glover, on the other side, people talk about him being more of a grappler, that his striking has gotten better over time. Quite a few people mention that he throws the same combination over and over, and so they feel like it should be pretty easy to prepare for. But if he does get you to the ground, it's very likely that he's going to be able to submit you, control you, win the fight there. Now, there was some nuance that people brought up. You know, this is the main event. It's a title fight, and so people spent a lot more time on this than some of the other fights on this card. And so there was just a couple nuances people talked about, is that while Prochazka has the advantage striking most likely, because he fights with his hands down, and Dan Tom in specific talked about Yuri's movement and how he likes to duck to the right when he throws, and that Glover can have a very strong left hook. And so if Glover is able to hit him with that left hook while he is ducking to his right, that would be a spot where Glover absolutely could put him down and KO him. Also, Yuri is very athletic, and so unlike some other people that Glover has taken down, if Yuri isn't hurt first and it goes to the mat, there's a good chance that he'll be able to get up just because of his athleticism, at least early on in this fight. And so while in some ways it is a striker versus grappler matchup, it's not quite that straightforward. There is a pathway for Glover to be able to knock him out, and it's not necessarily over just because the fight goes to the mat. Also, people do talk about, and if you've watched Glover's recent fights, you know this, that he does tend to get rocked. He gets rocked, then he goes for a takedown. He fights through it, he gets it, and he ends up putting people away. So the consensus on this fight is, I would say actually Glover Teixeira is where more people are ending up, but barely. In terms of a straight pick, I would say 55 to 60% of people I've listened to are on Glover, but in terms of betting, almost unanimously people are on Glover because he's an underdog. Right now at plus 175, people would say that is the right spot in terms of a betting pick if you want to bet the money line. Also, most people definitely like the under 2.5 on this fight. All right, my take on this one, and hey, these NBA games start like 5 minutes after, so I've got 5 minutes still. My take, I really came in this wanting to take Glover. I love Glover Teixeira. Probably because he's 42 years old and I'm in my 40s. And so there's like some kinship, although I couldn't have done what he did when I was in my 30s or 20s, but hey, we're both older, so I like Glover. I want him to win this fight. I want him to retain the belt. I'll be cheering for him. And coming into this, I actually thought that taking Glover would be the right move here, that he would have the advantages to win this fight. My concern is that he has been getting rocked, shooting takedowns, and then coming back for a win. But if he gets dropped in the first round or two by Prochazka, I don't know that Yuri's going to let him off the hook. And Yuri's striking is so dynamic that if he does connect cleanly, I fear that this is going to be the time where Glover just gets put out cold, and there's no coming back from that. And so I do think that Yuri getting a KO in the first round or even the second round is one of the likely outcomes in this fight. Now, I do believe that Glover can beat him on the feet. I already talked about what Dan Tom said, and I think that's true. Like, Glover is a tough dude, and he absolutely can land some shots on Yuri as well, who does fight with his hands down. And so that's not off the table. Glover KO is a path to victory. Glover sub, obviously a path to victory. I mean, if he can get him down and not let him back up, I actually do think the fight's over. I don't think Yuri's going to have anything for him on the ground except potentially the ability to get back up. So I do think that Yuri KO, if I had to pick a most likely outcome for this fight, it would be that. However, I think Glover has multiple paths to victory. And so what do you do with a big underdog who has multiple paths to victory while the other guy maybe has the most likely path to victory? I have not bet this fight yet, but with other people, I do like the unders here, and the fight doesn't go the distance. This is down to under 1.5 at plus 105 now. I would not want to do that. I would pay the juice for under 2.5 if I was going to play that. I will also look at under 3.5 or 4.5 for parlays. I'd like to buy myself a little bit more time for this fight to potentially get ended. I am also going to look at Yuri KO1 and KO2 and see what the lines are on that, as I do think that is his most likely path to victory. If this fight does get through a round or two, I will also look at betting Glover live, as even though he can get tired, I think the longer this fight goes, the better it is for him. And then also, if I do end up putting Yuri in my parlays, which I don't know if I will yet, actually, you can look when I post them because I haven't made that final decision. If it gets to the end, I probably would hedge out a little bit on Glover, especially because of the plus number that he's at. And I might even look to do that after the first round when that plus number could grow. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to this fight. I think it'll be a great one. And while I feel like from listening to people and watching these guys fight, have a little bit of a handle on how the fight might go, there are multiple pathways I could see it taking. And so it is a little bit hard to call it for sure, but hopefully it'll be entertaining. And a fun way to end a lackluster card. Let's look at the comments here. Shady has a couple more things here. He says, the old man by KO is plus 800. Definitely don't hate that, man. If he gets him down, it might be easier for him to do that than sub him. As Shady says, the ground and pound definitely in play. He likes the over 1.5 rounds. So let me throw this out too. This is actually another thing that I would consider is I may in my parlays play the under 3.5, maybe under 2.5, depending on the lines. But if I get to the final fight and that's near the top of my parlays, and again, if you don't know, I do these ladder parlays where it's like, my most confident picks, and CJ Safdie has done this forever. It's absolutely where I got the idea for it, not trying to pretend that it's mine. But what I might do in that case is hedge out by betting over 1.5. And there's the possibility if it ends between 1.5 and 2.5 rounds, I could win both bets. But you're guaranteed to win at least one of them, right? So that's something to just watch. I'll try to tweet this stuff out as we go through the card. All right, that is UFC 275 Roundup. Hope you are able to make some great picks. Check me out on Twitter at NBA Attack. As I mentioned earlier, because he's in the chat, shout him out again. Absolutely go follow Shady. Check my Twitter. I shouted him out earlier today with his Twitter handle, so make sure you go follow him. Let's go make some money this weekend. Hopefully enjoy some fights. Hope it goes well. Hey, enjoy that NBA Finals game tonight. Let's go Celtics.